Hello?
Hello, this is Poppocast, Poppintree Youth Project's podcast series.
Sparky, what the f*** are you talking about?
How's it going, folks? This is Poppocast, fourth one in a while. I'm over here, so I'm going to introduce who's in the room, or who's going to be doing the podcast today. We have Jake Boland, the legend that is, Callum Gorman, and Jack Beattie. And we have the honour and pleasure of having Lynn Ruane here today. So Lynn, thanks very much for coming. I'm going to hand you over to the guys now, if that's okay.
Yeah, all good.
Thanks for coming, Lynn. Would you be able to give us a brief introduction into your life?
I love the name of the podcast, by the way, Poppocast. So I'm Lynn, as you said. I'm from Tala. I have spent most of my life in Tala, but we started out in Ballymun, which is always kind of me claim to the north side. I was born in the Rotunda as well. That's a bit of a claim to the north side, isn't it? And so I grew up in Tala, and I'm a politician. I'm a senator. But before that, I developed addiction services and community services, and have worked in just different community settings for a long, long time. So a lot of the politics I do is very much based on both my experience growing up in a very, very working class environment, and also working in services and working with different groups that have been marginalised. And I'm in the Senate since 2016. I have two daughters. One is nearly 24 and one is 17. So they're getting older now. But I was a teen mother. I was 15 when I had my little girl, and left school quite young. But found other ways to go through education, I suppose, in ways that kind of suited me, and found my way in the world then in terms of what I do now. So now I'm a legislator, but I still very much identify with being very much a community worker. So I try and do that more probably than I'm stuck in the chamber with the other politicians.
Yeah,
cool.
Great. Is there a certain reason that you're for the independent party?
So independent is the way it's actually, so I think that's what gets a bit mixed up now, because some people are kind of grouping together and saying that they're in like the independent party. But that doesn't really actually, how does that translate? Because an independent is actually someone who works alone. Mm-hmm. So they're independent of a party. But what's happened over a few years is lots of independent politicians have probably seen the benefit of maybe grouping together, maybe for resources, maybe for impact, whatever. So I'm not actually part of a party at all. I'm an independent. So I'm voted in as an individual. But what I do is in the Shannon, because a lot of people will know what the Dáil is, because that's probably what people see more publicised on the telly and on the news. But Ireland has two houses, so the upper house and the lower house. And where I'm in is the upper house. And we work on the same legislation that the other house does. But to do that, we do have to get speaking time and private members' business. So what private members' business is how a politician will bring legislation or policy on the floor. We do have to work in groups. So sometimes groups of like-minded independents. Now, there's lots of groups of independents, and they're all a bit of everything. Like, they're like literally all sorts of everything. But the people that I work with in my group, in the Shannon, is three other independents. One is Senator Eileen Flynn, who was a community and youth worker, grew up on Labrador Park, is the first traveller to be in the Oireachtas, and Senator Alice Mary Higgins, who's also an independent, who's worked for lots of different organisations with older people or with women's organisations or community development. And then Frances Black, who was in the arts, was a singer, still does a lot in the arts, but she has developed family support programmes for people who have experienced addiction within the household. So we came together because we all have, I suppose, a history of working directly with people. So we came together as a grouping, not a party, but it's a grouping so that we can get certain privileges within the house in terms of speaking times and bills. Is that an easy explanation, do you think? Yeah. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Definitely, if anything that I'm saying, because the Shannon doesn't get a lot of airtime, feel free to say to me, well, what is that, or explain that, like, you know, because sometimes I forget that, like, you know, not everybody has I didn't before I came a senator. I didn't know what I was going to do. Got elected and I was like, so what? Wait, what? What do I do? What's that? So feel free to throw questions at me if I didn't explain anything well. Yeah.
Perfect.
What is, you mentioned something called the Oireachtas?
Yeah. So the Oireachtas is the Irish word, I suppose, for parliament. So obviously Ireland uses lots of different terms compared to other parliaments. So Teacht Dála is like a TD, but like, you know, that might be an MP or whatever, you know, in a different country. And the Oireachtas is basically our parliament. The Dáil is basically an Irish word then for the lower house, and the Seanad is obviously the Irish word then for Senate. So it's the Oireachtas is all the different departments, the different houses, the different committee rooms. So you've obviously the Seanad, the Dáil, but then you have committees who feed into the work of the departments that are made up from politicians from all different parties and independents. And you might have, like, so you have like a justice committee, you have a children's integration and equality committee, you have what ones am I on? So you'll have the drugs committee, hopefully starting up soon now, looking at drug policy. So you have special committees, and then you have long-standing committees that are associated with the departments. So the Oireachtas is kind of all the different functions within the Irish Parliament.
If you weren't gonna go into politics, do you know what else you would have went into?
Yeah, I think I will always come back to community style work in different ways. I still, like, I do a lot of work in the prisons now. I still do a lot of work in the drug services, and that would be, even though I use my platform as a politician to be able to create different initiatives in different communities, it's not probably my direct work. Do you know what I mean? Because my direct work is scrutinising law and policy and amending legislation and trying to bring in new legislation. So I reckon by the fact that even while being a senator, I haven't been able to completely pull myself out of community work, because that's what I enjoy, working directly with people. So I would imagine that the fact that I spent 20 years developing addiction services and working in homeless services, I definitely would probably still be working on both providing services and initiatives to young people or to people experiencing addiction, or in relation to poverty and in relation to prison. But I'm not sure at what level I would have worked in that over the years, you know, whether that would be at a policy level or a management level, or continuing to be maybe a direct community worker or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, from what you've said and like what was on your website, like you said your history with like teen pregnancy and substances and stuff like that. Was like when you were 15, you were like caught up in all that. Was there like a moment or something that made you like become this? Because like
I think it's lots of moments. Do you know, I think if we were counting on one moment, like if the moment could pass and you think that your chance is over, you know, and I don't believe that there's any one thing. And I think it's lots of different things can happen to allow you to engage. I think where I was extremely privileged was I had a very safe home life. Mm-hmm. So even though I was involved in all sorts in the community, I was diagnosed with ADHD as well last year, and that's given me a whole new way to look at the experiences I had growing up, and a lot more makes a lot of sense. But I think I was very lucky that I always had a roof over my head. Mm-hmm. So some people, like, they don't have the safety of, you know, a safe home, you know. So I was able to go from all the kind of hardship that was happening in the community, you know, whether it was experiences of violence or, you know, a lot of my friends have died very young, and having to kind of really live in an environment where you're expected, or you expect that you may not age. Mm-hmm. That's a really mad thing to think about as a young person. And those experiences then, even though they were heavily influencing me, my mum and dad always really supported me and gave me a way back all the time. And not everybody has that, because different houses have different struggles and different things to consider. But my parents obviously felt that, no, we can keep on supporting her. So I think their support on an ongoing basis has helped rather than one big moment.
Yeah.
But I do think being pregnant slowed down the trajectory that I was on and how chaotic I was.
Yeah.
You know, but that's not the case for everyone. So I'm always reluctant to pinpoint one thing, because I think people's lives are complex.
Yeah.
Their family situations are complex. The skills that they have are complex, and the supports that they have access to. So I do be, reluctant to name one thing, because I think it's unfair then to people that may not be able to grab onto that one thing.
Yeah.
You know, I think we all find the ways that we can to survive and get on with whatever we need to do.
You said you come from like Finglas and Ballymun and Tala.
Yeah.
Like coming from there and like navigating through systems that like we would consider to be quite stuffy, like the Oireachtas and stuff. Did you face prejudice and like discrimination stuff?
Yeah, and I still do. Like, I think the subtlety of some of the comments is quite interesting. And I think unless you've had a certain experience of class, people don't even pick up on it.
Yeah.
Like, people around me don't pick up on the comment that someone has just said, where to me, I'm like, sorry, have you just heard what that person said? Like, that's so judgmental and so biased. Or, you know, they may make, like, I mean, during some of the recent referendums, like one senator in the chamber basically quoted this, you know, this study around where basically what he said was, if it broke down the academic language he was trying to use, he was basically saying that the rise of criminality was due to the decline of marriage. So he was basically making out as if, like, you know, single mothers are raising criminals. Like, and I'm in the chair in the Senate, like, got fuming, and I'm looking at everyone else going, can yous not hear what he's after saying? And that stuff really stands out to me, because I'm like, unless you have had a certain experience and prejudice against you, sometimes, even though people may care about your cause or care about what happens to you, if they've not lived that reality, sometimes they don't even see the little chipping away at who we are, you know.
Yeah.
Or even like campaigns like welfare cheats, cheat us all. They're all very classist politics, and people making out that, like, people are to blame for their own difficult conditions, even though so many people in one community are experiencing those difficult conditions. And that can't be by accident. Not everybody in that community can just have chosen to not do well. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that somehow that there's something like, so it's communities that have been under-resourced and underserved. So I think I do face subtle biases, but I think where I'm lucky is I'm also, whatever it is about my character, I'm not really put off by like people will, like, some people will call me, like, you know, on videos of me speaking, like, people will say stuff like, you know, she's only a knacker, what a junkie, what a this, and I could be talking about the weather. Do you know, like, it doesn't matter what I'm talking about. They hear my accent and they start throwing like classist slurs, and obviously then insulting travellers while they're at it. You know, it's mad how they try and break you down for just having just having a working class accent. Or if I get really passionate about something, they make out as if I'm aggressive, and I'm like, they haven't a clue if they think that that's aggressive, and it's me just being exercised. But they can say whatever they want in their suits. They can be as like racist, they can be as homophobic, they can be as classist, but because they carry themselves in what the stuffy spaces say is acceptable, well, then nobody bats an eyelid, you know. So it's hard.
Your exposure to all the areas, would that give you like an extra mind, like that you're thinking?
Explain that again.
Like, sorry, like your exposure to all the different areas, like the alcoholism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like that would make you more open-minded to all the situations, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you accept that everyone has a different perspective, and everyone has a different set of sensitivities as well in how they navigate the world. So you could have a brother and a sister grow up in the same house and give a totally different account of what that was like, and that's because we're all so individual, and our hearts receive information differently. You know, if you've had any sort of, if someone shamed you when you were very young and you haven't been able to really understand that, well, then you might be a bit more reactive later on in life, you know, in your teenage years to certain things or certain types of characters. But yet you might have a sibling that didn't have that type of shame or humiliation maybe in the community or the classroom, and they experience things differently. So I think in all the work that I've done, I think it's always about trying to accept people where they're at. Now, you can still obviously if you're working, especially because I work in prisons and stuff. So just because you're accepting where people are at, it doesn't mean that people can't also be accountable, but accountability also has to have every choice and chance to be able to develop and grow and learn, and we need to create the conditions where people can do that, you know.
And you said you dropped out of school at 15.
Yeah.
What was your process like? Did you finish your education and did you go to university and stuff?
So I sat my junior cert pregnant. I tried to go back after I had Jordan, and it just didn't, like, my mum and dad were working, it was hard. I already didn't like school.
Yeah.
So I mean, I wasn't probably trying very hard to go back. Yeah. It didn't, I understand now lots of things about myself now with the ADHD diagnosis as well. So I obviously had a lot of traumatic things were happening around me, but I was also very flighty, very impulsive.
Yeah.
You know, I was the kid that was just like, the window's open, I should get out the window and go home. Do you know what I mean? Without explaining to the classroom what's going on. So I had all these impulses, you know, and I just done whatever came into my head, you know. So school environment for me was very constricted, and I was constantly coming up and battling against that restriction because I just couldn't operate in it. So I went and I studied. When Jordan was about maybe 10 months old, I went to a place called An Casan, which is like a community education place for women in Tala.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful because Jordan could go into the Rainbow House there, which is a creche. So free childcare, like not a lot of people have access to free childcare to be able to actually go and, like, you know, every community, there should be several different opportunities in every community, like here in Poppintree and stuff, where women can access work or school or whatever it may be, and that you know that your child has a childcare place. And I was lucky that I had that.
Yeah.
And I was able to study. So I did like different tech stuff. And then I went on to study addiction studies in IT Tala one evening a week, a certificate. So started off, you know, small, but when I say small, it wasn't small, it was huge. Yeah. It was huge for me. But like when you know, as you get older, you see the little steps that you took.
Yeah.
And then I went later on when I worked in drug services for a good few years. And then there was like the financial crash and the bank and stuff, and communities like ours were the forced to be just all the services just stripped out, and that kind of politicized me.
Yeah.
So I decided to go back to university. Well, not back, I decided to go to university, but I didn't have leaving cert maths and stuff, so it was hard. So I done a thing called the Trinity Access Programme. And that was able to then bring me up to the standard I needed to be able to go in and do a degree in terms of maths and literacy and that type of stuff.
And you mentioned before that like you had a very understanding household and like you had the free like childcare and stuff. Did you have any other supports that helped you get from like point A to B? Like any notable ones?
Yeah, like I mean, like there was people that took risks on me. Like there was a priest in Tala that ran the drug services there, and he offered me a job to develop a service, an initiative, like a group with young heroin users that from the age of 13 to 15, 16 in my own community. Yeah. And that was big, like to employ a 17-year-old to actually develop initiative with it. But nobody of an older generation could actually engage with that group and get them in. And now you wouldn't get that. They'd say, oh no, boundaries, and you need to have this degree and you need to have that. But actually, people closest to the issue are closest to the solution. So the fact that he was able to see that I might be young and still quite wild at the time, right? But he could see my potential and he offered me a job. And I think that was a huge game changer for me. Yeah. I also had a therapist, a counsellor, like a local counsellor in a service out there. It was called Swan Family Support. Yeah. So definitely local initiatives. And that's why, like when they start underfunding, and they've always underfunded, but when then they underfund access to even free counselling in communities like ours, they're all the things that helped me. Do you know? And that's when they strip that away, they're stripping away all the things that actually help people be able to take them steps. You're saying the community programs have, like, did you have a youth club? Were you involved in? So we had a youth club. It's a bit of a controversial question. So we had a youth club. I was probably a messer anyway, like, but I suppose lots of us were messers, but they, I used to go in a lot. There was a youth club on a Wednesday night or something, I remember, and you'd go there for the little disco and all as well. You know, the disco would be on a Friday or whatever, and then I remember going up and playing table tennis, and I loved all of that kind of stuff, and going away on the summer projects and stuff. And it wasn't youth work. Like, I didn't get youth work specific in the way you get people that, like, there's doing youth work and then there's having a youth club, and they're kind of two different things, if you know. But like, so, but around that time, a lot of the Concerned Parents Against Drugs were kicking off. And what happened, I feel, for me, it wouldn't have been for everyone. Some people still felt comfortable using the space, but a lot of the vigilante meetings start happening in the same space that the youth club. And it just didn't, for me, I was I'm realising now I was quite sensitive to those things. And then there was kind of like it felt like a barrier had been created, I suppose. So, and I think maybe I was more destined for roaming the streets at the time than actually engaging in what the youth club was still offering.
Like in our youth club, like in this one here, like there's targeted programs for each group. Like last year we did personal development and stuff. So like, would you say that those type of initiatives are like important to engage in?
Hugely important. And I'd say even going back when I was going to youth clubs, like there probably would have been groups that were getting targeted interventions. I just think I was probably on the fringe of all of those all the time. And I know lots of people have benefited massively from the youth services and talent and stuff and the different things that they've done over the years. But I think I was probably, now looking back, I was one of those hard to reach or engage. Like, I was just on the fringe, and you probably would have needed to work really hard to keep me there. But all those, whether it's personal development, whether it's, you know, doing like interviewing and podcasts and music and anything that is of interest to a young person, it's good to do with them. And I think, but I do think then there'll always be a group that they might just need to chat to you for 10 minutes at the fucking side of the shop. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's different levels of engagement that's needed. So definitely like personal development, doing all this, but then any engagement with young people in any way in their spaces, I think, is always a good thing. And
we saw like the very impressive list of all the things like you've integrated and stuff. What would you consider to be like the thing that, in your personal opinion, like touched the most people, like
that I've done?
Yeah.
That's a big question, because you can sometimes feel a bit defeated, because, you know, when you're working directly with people, you have an automatic feedback loop of, like, you know, people really getting something out of what you're doing. When you move into politics, then you're trying to change something that's like legislative, like it's so slow, you know. So on a legislative level, I'd say I'm still working towards trying to create those changes. But I think one thing I am proud of is that since I got elected, I very much know that I contributed massively to keeping drugs and addiction on the agenda. And I've not allowed that to ever fade away. And I've really raised the consciousness, I think, of a lot of politicians who wouldn't have really engaged with that topic. And I also think there's work that I do in the prisons. Like, I do different arts projects in the prisons, and there's some men that I work in there that society has kind of written off, and, you know, don't really want to ever think about them being people that have really massively developed away from the people that they may have been when they entered prison at like 18, 19, and some of them would be doing lifetime sentences and stuff. And the work that I do with them gives me massive, massive pride and hope. So even though it's not the quantity of people that I get to work with in the prison, but the quality of work that we're doing in terms of men being willing to go, actually, I want to talk with younger men about how, you know, like the drug trade or violence and all these things that they're entering into as young men, that actually it's not the way they want them to go. So you have older men who are very much involved in criminality at the highest levels, wanting to work with younger men and go, don't be me. Like, it's not what you think it is. And I think that has massive potential. To be able to actually look at how violence can, especially where young men can't meet their economic needs. So some of the core drivers of violence and crime is people feeling humiliated, right? So violence comes from a sense of humiliation, and also not being able to meet one's economic need.
Yeah.
So if you grow up and you don't see spaces for you to have success, you find ways that you can exert power over other people in your own community rather than out there into the society. And then it creates all these power dynamics and stuff. So some of the work that I'm doing there is in its very early stages, but I think it has the potential to really have a big conversation in Ireland that's not had about why young people get involved in, without shaming them, and why young people get involved in different things.
Like saying the prisons, do you think it's important that the person speaking about it has experience with it?
Oh, 100%. People think they know things because they've studied it, and they speak about it in a theoretical sense, and they speak about theory, and that's good if you want to use that theory to help improve things. But like I said, it just a couple of minutes ago, is that the closer you are to the issue, the closer you are to the solution. The problem is that people who are at that level to the issue, what we don't have is actual power and resource at a big scale to change the thing. So we have the solutions, but we need people with power to kind of help us break down those barriers and those power dynamics. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I do think people with experience will always impact. So now if I'm working on committees and I'm inviting people in, like a lot of my legislation, I work with people who are impacted by the thing I'm working on, and they help me build it from start to finish, what it looks like, what does the legislation look like, what does the amendments look like, you know, if we do an event, how will we do the event? So I try and engage people with experience at every single level of what I do. And instead of just then going like their experience and then someone else are the experts, what we should be saying, no, you're an expert by experience. Like if you've lived through something for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you're living in it and observing it and analysing it and trying to navigate it is expert experience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Over somebody that may say, well, I have a degree in addiction, but actually I don't actually have never experienced it, even though that degree is very valid and worthwhile. It still doesn't go the full way in being able to fully get to grips with what another group might be experiencing.
What do you think is the importance of young people voting in today's society?
Extremely important, but it's very hard to make the connections. So, like, I'm just going to say communities like ours to give kind of an example. Whether it's the 60s, the 90s, now, our communities have experienced so much pressure on them that people are living in highly stressed environments. And poverty doesn't obviously look the same as it might have done in the 60s, where, you know, I don't know about you as like we as our grandparents or whatever, but my dad always talked about like going around with holes in your shoes and having to put like a beer mat, you know, to make the to weld the sole together or whatever, like so you like rain didn't get up into your shoes, and you know, so there's a certain poverty looks different over all these years, but communities like ours have always experienced all the different faces of poverty. And it's not only financial, it's also cultural and social. So it's access to arts spaces, it's access to the music industry, it's access to the universities. And then when we get there, they want us to like their things. So if we break through, it's like, oh, well, you know, why don't you come and see our art gallery, whatever. And I'm going and I'm like, I've no interest in this art in here. So it's not only about being in the room to look at the art spaces or the cultural spaces, but it's about our creations being on display. It's about what we connect with, the music that we like, the plays that we want to see on the Abbey stage that we have written, you know, and we've created and we've acted in, and then we might be drawn in, you know. So I think sometimes our experiences over the years is that people from outside of our environments think that we just want to be in their environments, rather than us just wanting our environments to also have good conditions and a quality standard of life and quality pay and safe homes and safe streets and all of that. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, I think I've gone away from the question, but what was remind me what the question was.
What?
About voting. Yeah. So because we've experienced all of those things, and then we look at politicians and we're like, well, they've always been there and nothing has been different. we've always experienced harm to some degree in our communities. So why does politics matter to me, and why should I vote? Because they've never done that before. But the thing is, voting, if we manage to vote at mass, like imagine all of Ballymun and Finglas and Cabra, like whatever the side of, you know, which decided a seat in a big concentrated pool of people voted. The politicians, even if we don't agree with what they're saying, if we don't like them now, like if all of a sudden every house had people voting in it across these communities, the politicians all of a sudden then go, oh, so they're voting now. Oh, so I need to work on things that keep them voting for me, that keep them maybe working on stuff that we care about. So we may look at them and go, they don't fucking care about us. And in a lot of cases we'd be true, like it would be true, because they're led by the issues that the electorate who vote tell them are important. So we need to vote in massive numbers to say, well, these are the issues that we find important, you know. And then it's obviously, it's your own agency and autonomy around, well, I'm a citizen in this country, I want to go on to university, or I want to go out to work in whatever industry, I'm going to be paying tax. And it's also, we have a right to have a stake in what happens. Do you know what I mean? And I think being a voter as an individual is you taking a stake, but then if a community and then all the wider communities, that's them taking a collective stake and going, right, now this community is a community you need to answer to. Do you know what I mean? But right now, I don't think they feel they need to answer to us, because they might just go, sure, they're not going to show up on the ballot anyway, so why do I care? So I think we need to make them care.
Do you think there's anything that can be done to help like young people and anyone in a disadvantaged area get into voting?
Yeah, I think voting at 16, I think reducing the voting age is a good shout as well. Like, so, like whatever about the other generations that have already left school, right? But if you look at the voter age, if it was lowered to 16, voting, being registered to vote while you're still at home and in school would be easier, because in your politics and society classes or whatever social kind of sciences classes you might have, there might be an effort to get everyone registered in the schools, right? So the fourth point is just being registered. So if you, and then imagine elections came around while you were turning 16 in school, like the politics and society, like teachers and stuff could really focus their efforts on encouraging and empowering young people to know, you know, what politicians are what politicians, what are the policy issues, what does Europe do for us, like why should we vote in the European elections, why does local politics matter. Like there could be a real drive at school level to actually raise the political literacy and awareness and consciousness of people while they're still in school. So I think that that's one thing. But the problem is we've infantilized young people. Like, you know, young people might say sometimes, and we've done research on this, I got a young guy who was 14 or 15 at the time from a deaf school. I got him to do work experience with me, and then we taught him how to carry out a particular research survey, and then we sent him out to different schools, and he done research with all different transition year students and stuff, and 16-year-olds in deaf schools. So all schools in communities like ours, right, to kind of get their view on voting at 16. And a lot of them said, no, but like I wouldn't know who to vote for, or no, like what have I got wrong? And it's like, well, clearly looking at the country, the fucking 50s and 40-year-olds and 60-year-olds don't know who to fucking vote for. So like, I don't know what any difference is a 16-year-old being able to become politically aware. But there's so many young activists, I think, that are demoting themselves to like not knowing who to vote for. But then when you talk to them about social issues like we are here today, or if you talk to them about housing, or if you talk to them about, you know, education, or if you talk to them about drugs, they're very politically aware. Do you know what I mean? And like some politicians, when we were looking at the vote at 16 to lower the age to vote, some politicians said, well, we don't let kids smoke until they're 18, so why would we let them vote? And it's like, because one is actually good for their health. What are you on about? How could you compare smoking at 18 to voting at 18? They're totally different things. Like, do you know? And I do think in franchising young people at an earlier stage would be a good show. And then I think politicians have a lot to answer for in making people want to vote and not vote. I think politicians often operate in like little sound bites, and they do play communities off against each other, and they don't do the graft. I don't think they organise at like a local level. Obviously they have to be in the chamber and do the clinic work and do the legislation. But I do think that most politicians, especially those who say they're progressive and want to improve our areas, I think they should be in the communities more. I think they should be dedicating even one day a week to running different initiatives in communities. That's not just about them signing up for a party. Like engaging young people on the things that they care about, like running different, like run 5-a-side competitions. I don't know, like go and do, like I do lots of different community projects, but it's Trinity graduates that vote for me. Like I work with people who aren't actually me electorate, but I think local politicians and TDs should actually be working with youth clubs, local traveller initiatives, and not just coming out to talk to them about why they should vote for them. They should actually be being creative. I think more politicians should operate like community development workers. And I think that would over time build trust between politicians who want your vote, and it would also encourage local people to actually kind of bridge that gap between them and political representation.
Do you think if politicians had to do like a youth work module or something like that, that would increase awareness? I
think politicians should not be politicians until they've gone out and had different jobs. Like I think people should, like career politicians make me a little bit scared. Like who wants to be 18 and go straight into politics? Like it's, you know, there's so much like now I wouldn't put off an 18-year-old running. I'm not saying that. Like I think it's great if young people want to run in politics, but being able to get other experience is so essential to be able to understand the different areas of life. But some people only ever want to be a politician. And that might be all right if you were also willing to dedicate your time to volunteer in other places to gain that experience of other communities and stuff. But I do think politicians should definitely be working harder to understand the issues. And the problem is they're not always working hard to understand, really understand an issue, because it takes too long, right? So if you look at addiction, and if I'm in there talking about addiction, they want to shorten that down because really politicians are working in election cycles. So if it's not something that can be done in the space of a year or two, well then it's kind of like, why would they want to know? So they don't spend enough time kind of working on the causes and the preventions and the cures. They always just want to be reactive to stuff. And I think that goes back to us voting then as well. Like if more of us voted, we would have to force an understanding of them to understand the complexities of all different types of people and all different types of communities.
So would you consider yourself like a community worker first, politician second? Like
Yeah. I'm not sure everyone would consider me like that now,
yeah,
but I consider myself like that. Yeah.
You spoke about lowering the voting age to 16 and having local politicians come in and do community work. Do you think there's something that we could work on to get people more politically aware, or even just the interest to start voting?
I mean, I think there's all different types of groups in the community, so it's probably going to be a different response for different groups. Do you know what I mean? I think, like, say here in the U Club, you could definitely make politics a little bit more fun as well. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many different issues that people care about, that if you get people talking about the issues rather than the politicians themselves, it kind of draws you in. But I think also getting interesting speakers into the community as well that are, like, sound and look like the people who are in the community, like that can kind of motivate people as well. But I also think then that other different community projects have a role. Say if there's anyone working with older people, and obviously the older generation they were historically better at voting. But I think making politics relevant to people, you know, like people might not care about the politics that they see on the telly, or people are fighting over this, or this is happening or that's happening, but somebody may have a very particular thing that they care about, and being able to find a way for people to pursue an interest that they have in something that they think needs to be changed, you know. So I think whether it's in school, in the youth clubs, in the different community spaces, but I also think it's about making politics also fun, because it looks quite angry out there at the minute when politics comes up, doesn't it? It's kind of like, why would I want anything to do with that? Like, so, but the thing is that really politics is people coming together to make decisions about how we should all live. And if you broke it down to just that and go, well, how do we do that? You know, so I think getting people involved in a very creative way is good, but not only when elections have come up. Like, just make people more engaged with society in general, and they'll automatically want to vote.
Yeah. And then another thing, you were talking about people learning like what the European Union does for us, get a little bit of a head start. What is the difference between a local election and then a European election?
Okay, so the local election is your local authority. So they're the ones that you'll see like in, you know, Dublin City Council, and the ones that you'll see more in your area. And they have several different functions, you know, so government doesn't give them enough power, to be honest, because if they had more power, they could definitely do more at a local level. But they'll be the ones that you'd most associate with, you know, like the local parks, the local schools. They might be on the boards of the sports club. They're looking at kind of the local amenities. You know, the local councils look after like the commercial rates of being able to rent a space, you know, and them things is really important. So imagine you're young, you talked about doing the working in the gym and having a bit of interest in that. But imagine if you went down and done a bit of a course as a PT, and you thought, you know what, I might like to try and see, can I build up and have a little side project and do, you know, a few clients a week. But then you go to try and rent a little small space in your local area, and the commercial rates are through the roof. And it's like, well, how can any young man from an area like this, you know, like, so like they're the types of stuff you might go to a local councillor to say, like, there's not enough spaces in areas like this for young people to be able to try new things or develop a little initiatives and stuff. And then the EU Parliament is it's a much wider electorate. So, you know, you might see people on the polls out there that are running for Europe, but they're running for like a big, huge part of Dublin. It's not just local. So, and they work on everything that comes up at a European level. Everything from, God, how can you even capture it? Like at the moment when you look, like the European Parliament has a really big kind of, there's big conversations happening, say, around migration, around wars, around climate change. There's different stuff around, God, quite fast, you know, but they're working. And obviously I've not been in European politics, so I'm probably not the best to answer like what that day to day looks like. But they do work on stuff that kind of is a shared project across Europe. But also, like, Europe was set up for two reasons. It was like, one was economic reasons in terms of trade, but the other one was, it was actually about peace and security, because peace in Europe wasn't something that was very relevant. There was lots and lots of kind of wars between different countries and stuff. Ireland was obviously very neutral in that, and I think Ireland's neutrality is really important because it puts us in a really good position to talk about why peace matters. But I think Europe has very much moved away from a lot of its core values in terms of, is it still a peace project, you know? And if it's not, well, that's where somewhere like Ireland comes in terms of its European engagement, because we should be demanding that Europe is about creating peaceful, I suppose, connections between different states and not supporting wars. And so, yeah, there's probably European politicians now would probably say, Jason, that's not all we do. I'm sure they have like a really big day to day, but then there's European laws passed that goes through different processes and stuff, and directives. So like European directives would come down to certain countries, and then them countries would probably negotiate and create legislation based on particular European directives and stuff. Sometimes, like, so on the Justice Committee, I might have to read a European directive around Interpol and how countries share data about each other, or information on convictions, or, you know, so there's lots of different intersections between the country and Europe. But it would be probably good to get somebody in that really understands that the future of Europe, what it has been and what it could be and what it should be, that could do probably a better job than me. But that's what it is. One is European levels, one is that more local level, the person you see on your street. And then obviously the general election will happen then next year, which is the Dáil. So that will kind of probably be, I don't know, around Christmas time or something.
You mentioned you were talking about putting politics in school. Do you think there would be anything about, like, because if one student like supports one party and another student supports a different party, do you think there would be anything about bullying or being like,
yeah, so well, I think being able to create spaces where people can safely discuss ideas, and I think whether you're party affiliated or not, really it's about ideas, and really it's about well, you know, what is, you know, how do we negotiate on particular subjects and stuff? But there is, we definitely can't have schools that's kind of looking like the way it looks like on Twitter. That's not politics. Do you know what I mean? People just shouting at each other and not allowing each other space and stuff, especially if you're young and aspirational and open-minded. The party stuff probably shouldn't even come into it. It should be about, you know, what affects our lives, you know, what type of agency do we have in terms of how well we can do or want to do. Like, why are so many young people not able to get into universities for particular communities? And I think that that's all politics. So I think sometimes what happens is we think that politics is those party people that we see, and that's not necessarily it. Politics is the different ways in which we have to live together. And I think if you have somebody that really understands how to do that well in schools, it would be good. Like, we've always had debating in lots of different schools where people debate issues, and I think that that's really just an extension of that. And also having good student councils. Like, so many schools, they say they have a student council, but actually there's nobody really making the space so that it's really, you know, has a space to meet every week and what is it implementing, and some of it's a bit tokenistic, and then other schools are amazing at having student councils and class reps and stuff. So there should definitely be like a national implementation of student bodies as well at secondary level, so that there's students are empowered to also be able to decide what the school culture looks like as well, in terms of, you know, being able to engage in and like being involved in a sports club is political as well. Do you know, like, politics happens in every space. Do you know what I mean? So I think sometimes it's about taking it out of that party space and making sure people aren't kind of put in silos, but being able to discuss ideas.
Because part of our transition year program, we've had talks on different laws and different things. And
Yeah.
we've had students that refuse to be part of like the gay talks or the religion talks. Like, people just refuse to go.
Right.
And I think it's less because of their personal opinion, but just because of what's been like told on them.
Right.
Because like they just flat refuse. Like, they haven't heard the details of it. They just heard the headline of the talk and they just refused.
They refuse to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, I mean, that's an issue as well, is because so much is happening online now that there's also often as well a lot of disinformation and misinformation that can create fear in people. So people think that something's about something when really it's not, you know. And I think that's hard to manage because of the online world now. So it's hard to get the actual factual information of what it is that we're engaging in. But like, I mean, say like with my daughter, like, she might not engage in if someone was coming in to do like a sex education course, but is, you know, is from like a Catholic organization, like, she won't engage in that, right? Because, you know, she's interested in positive engagement in how we talk about sex in schools. Do you know what I mean? And factual and science-based and all of those things, you know. But she would have got a lot of that information from me at home. But some people are afraid, I think, to engage in some subjects, because I think people are afraid that there's some effort now to like brainwash kids, and it's kind of like, well, I think we've possibly been brainwashed since the inception of Ireland, you know. So it, like, I think we need to look at why people are so afraid to engage in particular subjects, instead of looking at the subject, because people can be afraid, oh, am I going to be seeing people are just, you know, or they're all woke, so they're making me do a class on, I don't know, feminism, or on, you know, trans healthcare, or whatever it may be. Like, so people think that there's some sinister thing going on, rather than us actually just having real conversations, how people can live and flourish and do okay and be able to live together and be different. Like, our very essence is that we're all different. So I think we need to create a culture in our schools where people are not so afraid to engage in topics that they may initially actually just be a little bit afraid of.
So if you could pass a policy or a legislation or something with zero resistance from any side, just go straight through, what would it be?
I'm going to try and answer it, right? But it's hard to answer. Because I don't know whether if I had that power for something to happen without resistance, I don't know whether it would be a legislation or I would completely demolish the system as a whole. Because we keep trying to fix a system that was never developed for us to participate in. So even creating one law, but it's in this system that can be quite neoliberal, quite market driven, all of those things. So for me, I would make the system not be so led by personal gain and profit. And so really it's looking at a more flat structure where everybody has the chance to succeed and flourish. So if I had a magic wand, I would make all our conditions equal. So everywhere we live, everywhere we go, it's not just about opportunity, it's about the equality of the conditions in which we live. And I would make sure that there was real equity and equality in terms of, so basically you would end poverty. You would not have such a capitalistic culture and such a materialistic culture. And it would be more about people being able to be free to be themselves without oppression. So I'd end oppression.
Would you have any stories behind your tattoos?
Loads, but I'm not sure you'll have the time. So Ready or Not is a film that I wrote that will be out this year. All working class kids casting that from different communities around Dublin. A feature film, so it will hopefully be in a cinema for you to see. My pal Jennifer, she was when we were very young, she was in a road traffic accident when we were crossing the road, and had a big impact on me obviously as a young person. My dad used to call me Magic, so that's what that's there. Saint Christopher, my dad used to wear it. Well, I have it at home. My dad died in 2013, but he wears a Saint Christopher's medal that's years old, and he said it was the patron saint of travellers. So when I was not home and he couldn't find me and he was ringing all the Garda stations and ringing all the hospitals, he used to kind of just say, oh God, maybe, now he wasn't overly religious, but you know, just the intention of, you know, hopefully Saint Christopher is minding her or wherever she is and I have to find her. All the flowers represent the different people who have died in my life, and the months that they bloom represent the months that they died. So as you can see, there's a lot of flowers. So that's something I'm very passionate about, is us having more discussions about why so many people die at such a young age in communities like ours. Like, it's not normal and it doesn't get kind of spoken about enough, and the impact that has then on the wider community. And then finally, I'll give you an example of one more. Let me think. Well, pick one.
The bracelet.
Yeah.
Oh, the bracelet. So there's a street artist called Joe Caslin. And if you Google him, you'll see all the amazing work that he's done. And he puts these big, huge pieces on different buildings around men's mental health, around drug decriminalisation. He done a piece of me in Trinity College where I was wearing like an official bomb carrying jacket from 1916. But instead of a bomb now in my pocket was legislation to decriminalise drugs. And it was kind of looking at, you know, volunteerism 100 years on and what it looks like. And so he has amazing pieces. But everyone that he buys, that he does a piece of, he buys them this little gold bracelet. So it's a little circle and it's on a little black thread. And there was places I've gone in Ireland where I've met people and I've noticed that they've had it on, and I just thought it was a lovely little connector. And what really impacted me was a family that he worked with, and a young man, and they were being deported. And they had lived in Ireland since they were 2 and 3, or maybe 1 and 2, the two brothers, and they'd never, you know, they sounded like us. All their school experience, their community, their mother obviously came here to flee a very, very difficult situation, and they were deporting them as teenagers. Like, they'd no memory of the land in which they came from, the language, nothing, which was quite scary. And I remember sitting in the court while we were appealing that deportation, and I remember my hand was just beside me, and obviously, like, you know, I'm sitting there and you have this young black man, and I just remember watching their 2 gold bracelets because he had also been in a piece, and I just thought it's a lovely way to connect with people. So, but the thread kept breaking, and I was like, I really wanted to keep the representation of what it meant, how we're all connected in different ways. So I got it tattooed on me, and I got Joe Caslin just to send me his signature, and I used his signature as the no. Mm-hmm. So that's that.
Is there a certain music type that you would listen to?
Rap and rave. 2 ends of the spectrum. Yeah. Rap and rave. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm still stuck in the 90s. I think anyone that's kind of been reared in the 90s is stuck in a bit of a time warp. So I do like lots of different types of music, but I like sometimes, and I love Bob Marley, and I love UB40, and I love rolling into Leinster House on a summer's day with the window down and just like something mad coming from my car.
And my last question, I was talking to my mum.
Yeah.
I asked her if there was a question that she would like to ask, and she said, if there was somebody in your life or something that happened that you think you could have helped but you didn't and you regret it, what would you have done differently, or what have you done to help?
It's really hard because I'm sure there's lots of people that I've let down, and I'm sure there's lots of people that I didn't notice that something was going wrong, or, you know, and I think most people don't choose to not help. I think sometimes people just don't realise that help was needed, or sometimes nobody in the situation has any power to help. So it's really hard because it's a really hard question to answer. But I do think we should forgive ourselves. I think if your intentions are good and you're, you really want the best for people, but maybe your own resources were low at the time, or your own ability to help wasn't there. Because I think if all of us had the power to help, or the foresight, or knew that we could, we would. But sometimes the conditions don't allow for that. So I think we should forgive ourselves, because it's very difficult to help everyone in your life that needs help, especially if you're in a position in your life where you're really trying to also help yourself at the same time. It can be really difficult. So I think forgiveness and of oneself is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Real quickly, could we see a 5-a-side tournament in Tallaght?
Yeah. Well, we do. I organise the Oireachtas football matches. So I bring the politicians even into the yard in Mountjoy to play matches. I've brought them out onto the Shelbourne training pitch and stuff. Not Shelbourne, sorry, Shamrock Rovers training pitch to play some of the mental health charities out there and stuff. So like football is my dad was a League of Ireland footballer, and he was a referee. When we're talking about tattoos, I have a referee's whistle on my leg there for football refereeing. So yeah, I'm all for. We should actually have a north side south side tournament, shouldn't we? Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. Who would I play for though? Is that what you're going to ask?
Who do you think wins?
I don't know. Well, I'm not one of those like everybody wins. I'm too competitive.
Well, thanks very much for taking the time and coming out to talk to us today.
I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming up.